In this lesson, we're taking a look at movable seventh chords. This means that you can take these chord shapes and move them all over the neck to use with different root notes, and we're going to be looking at E, A and D root chords. So because of that, you end up with quite a lot of options, but don't worry, you don't need to memorize them all straight away. You can just pick your favorites or the ones that you think are going to be most useful, really master those, and then gradually add to your repertoire as time goes on. And remember, you can always come back to this video for future reference. This is part of my 7th chord lesson series. We've already looked at open 7th chords down the bottom of the neck, so do check those out if you haven't already. Once we've learned all the shapes, we're going to put them into practice with a bunch of fun songs. Remember, you can also download chord diagrams and extra resources from my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. And if you're interested in the theory of 7th chords, I've done a video on that which is linked below as well. But for now, let's dive into these movable 7ths. So we'll start with the E root chords, and I'm going to root all of these chords on the 5th fret, so that gives us an A root note in this case. So if we begin with just the normal A major bar chord, the first thing we can do is get an A7 really easily by just removing the little finger. So now we're hearing the first finger barring down on the D string, and the rest of the chord just as normal. So this gives us an A7, and you could describe this as an E shape, because if you imagine that I had a capo on the 5th fret, it's like I'm playing an E7, but because we're on an A root note, it gives us an A7 chord. And we can also have a little variation on this one by popping the little finger down on the 8th fret of the B string. All that does is double the 7th an octave higher, so it doesn't change the type of chord, just adds a bit more brightness. So those are a couple of options for A7s. Now if we look at the minor 7, if we go to a full A minor chord, all we're doing exactly the same is removing the little finger. So once again, you can hear that first finger barring down on the D string, and you've got your A minor 7, so all 5th fret apart from 3rd finger, which is playing the 7th fret on the A string. That just leaves us with the A major 7 chord to look at, which is slightly less reminiscent of the normal bar chord. So the major 7 is going to look like this. It comes across as a little bit more of a jazz chord, and it has quite a jazzy sound. So what I'm actually doing here is first finger is playing the root note on the 5th fret of the low E string. Then next I would add the 2nd finger. It's quite a stretch, but it's also on the 5th fret on the B string. So quite a big gap between those two fingers, and then the last two fingers are tucking in the middle on the middle 2 strings 1 fret higher. So I've got 3rd finger, which is on the 6th fret of the D string, and little finger, which is on the 6th fret of the G string. So the only 2 strings that we're not fretting are the A string, which is going to sit under the 1st finger to mute it, and the top string, which is going to be muted as well. I think I'm also muting it with the 1st finger, but you might mute it with 2nd finger, just depends on the shape of your hand. But those 2 strings should always be muted. You don't want any open strings in these chords, otherwise they stop being movable. So if I play that for you, 1 note at a time, we've got the bottom string, then the muted A string, then 6th fret, 6th fret, 5th fret, and then muted top string, and all together, that gives you an A major 7. So now let's take a look at the A root chords, and once again it's a 5th fret root which gives us D. So let's start with that D major bar chord as a reference point. So from here we'll go to the dominant 7, and we're going to do this by keeping the 1st finger bar down on the top 5 strings on the 5th fret, but we're then going to add 3rd finger 2 frets higher on the 7th fret of the D. 1st finger is going to stay barring the G and high E, and we're going to add the little finger down also on the 7th fret on the B string. So we've got the bottom string muted by the tip of the 1st finger, then D is playing the root note on 5th fret A, then we've got 7, then 5, then 7, then 5, and that gives you your D7 chord. Now the 7th degree is barred by the 1st finger on the G string, and that's a minor 7th interval because this is a dominant 7th chord. Don't want to go too deep into the theory here, but basically if you want to make it a major 7 rather than a dominant 7, you just need to raise the 7th by 1 semitone, and we can do that by popping the middle finger down on the 6th fret of the G string. Now if I strum the chord, we have that jazzy major 7 sound rather than the more bluesy dominant 7 sound. And in terms of the D minor 7, if we go to a normal D minor bar chord, it's just like the the E root where we can just take the little finger off and that'll reveal the 7 barred by the first finger once again on the G string. So add that into the chord and we get our D minor 7. And another little variation, we can pop the little finger down on the top string on the 8th fret, and that's once again just doubling the 7th an octave higher. So a nice little variation that you can throw in if you want to on that one. Another chord I want to mention is the minor 7 flat 5. Now the reason I'm mentioning this one, even though we're normally sticking to the more common 7ths in this series, is because it's the 7th degree of a major scale, so even though it's quite a jazzy chord, it does crop up more than you might expect. It looks and sounds like this. So obviously I'm still on that 5th fret D root note, I've got first finger on 5th fret, and then I've got second finger is going down 2 strings higher, 5th fret G, and then I'm kind of making the zigzag shape by popping the 3rd finger down on 6th fret D and little finger down on 6th fret B. So as I say, it's like a zigzag shape on the middle 4 strings. I've got 5, 6, 5, 6. You can hear it sounds quite jazzy, but as I say, this is the 7th degree of a major scale, so it resolves to the major chord a semitone higher. So for example, to use this one, if we were in the key of E flat and we had an E flat major 7, we could use that D minor 7 flat 5, or D half diminished it might be called, to resolve to it, which would sound like this. So nice kind of jazzy resolution there. And just before we move on, I want to show you one more neat little trick, which is if we go back to that D major bar chord, we can actually replace the 3rd finger bar with the 1st finger bar, so we've lost the root note on the A string now, but if we add the 2nd finger down on the top string 1 fret higher, this gives us an upper voicing of the dominant 7. So this chord here, just on the top 4 strings, is actually a D dominant 7. Now I'm still visualizing the root note over here, so that's my reference point. I'm just picturing this chord and then thinking about putting the 1st finger down instead of the 3rd finger on the bar, and then you get the 7th on top, and you get this cool little high pitched dominant 7 chord. So you can put this in as a little variation, so next, I want to talk about still A root chords, but this time using a C shape. So this is a little bit of a caged system reference, but it's not too difficult to understand. And we're going to use the 7th fret root for this one, so it's actually going to be an E7, not a D7. So all I want you to do is make the normal C chord shape in your hands, but fret it rooted on the 7th fret of the A string rather than the 3rd fret. So it's going to look like this. So it's like a C chord slid up so it's in the key of E. Now if I strum it as is, it's not sounding particularly good, and that's because we need to deal with all the open strings. So you can see that my thumb is coming over and muting the bottom string as it would in a normal C chord. The next open string would be the G string, but we're going to solve that one by popping the little finger down also on the 7th fret. That gives us the dominant 7th, and you should recognize this shape from the normal C dominant 7 open chord shape. We've also got the open top string, which actually in this key would sound fine, because of course the open top string is an E and I'm playing an E7, so we can get away with it. But generally for consistency, you want to make sure that top string is just muted underneath the 1st finger there, and that means you can move the chord around the neck without worrying that it's going to be out of tune. So we're just playing on the middle 4 strings, and we've got 7, 6, 7, 5, and this gives us an E7 using a C shape. We can also get an E major 7 using a C shape, but we have to use the full caged position. So this is like 1st finger being a virtual capo, and then the proper C chord part is played with the back 3 fingers. So if I strum that, this is like an E chord using a C shape. Sometimes you'll see people bringing the thumb over so 1st finger can focus on the top strings. That works as well, but I've always done the 1st finger muting the bottom string, so just go with whatever. And all we have to do for the major 7 is to remove the 2nd finger. So the 1st finger's barring the top 3 strings in this chord. If I do it with the thumb over, it's probably a little bit clearer so you can see what I'm doing. 2nd finger's not actually touching anything, it just can't really get out the way. But that would be a major 7 chord. Just for clarity, I'm going 7th fret on the A string, then 6th fret, and then 4th fret, 4th fret, 4th fret on the top 3 strings. This is an E major 7, but of course you can move it left and right for different keys. Finally, we're going to look at the D root chords, and once again we're back to the 5th fret root, so that actually gives us a G. So we're going to be using this octave if you picture the G on the bottom string. Now the actual D major shape chord is really tricky. This would be the proper cage shape, so this is a G major using a D shape, not very friendly. The 7th chords are actually far friendlier than the major chord, so that's quite a nice thing. So we'll start with the D7, so we've got first finger playing the G root note here on the 5th fret of the D, and then third finger is going 2 frets higher on 7th fret G, second finger's popping in the middle on 6th fret B, and then little fingers tucking in on the 7th fret of the top string. So it's another kind of zigzaggy shape. We're going 5, 7, 6, 7, and that would be a G7 using a D root. Hopefully you can see the open D7 chord shape in there if you're thinking in caged terms. And if we want the major 7, again nice and easy, we're just going to bar the top 3 strings with the third finger, keeping that 5th fret root on the D. So that gives us a G major 7 using a D root. Now there's one more, which is the minor 7, slightly trickier this one, but it can be done. So first finger staying on that root note, we're going to use second finger on the 6th fret of the B string, third finger on 6th fret of the top string, and then little finger's going to arc over the top to get that 7th fret on the G. That gives us 5, 7, 6, 6. This would be a G minor 7 using a D root. It can be played with a bar on the top 2 strings, which is a bit tricky. My fingers are quite bendy and even they don't really want to do it, but there it is, it can be done. To be honest, this is not one of my go-tos. I'm personally probably much more likely to just go and play a higher A shape on the string below. But some people will like this one. It's all about just picking the chords that you like the best and making use of them. So try them all and see what works. So there you have a bunch of movable 7th chords. Now, as I mentioned, you don't have to memorize them all at once, that would be a bit of a big task, so just pick your favorites and really master them, but you should now be able to play all the types of 7ths anywhere on the fretboard. Remember, the full 7th chord series is linked in the description, as are the chord diagrams on Patreon and that 7th chord theory video if you're interested in that as well. Be sure to subscribe for more content and give this video a like if you found it helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.